It was one of those mornings when everything seemed to move a little too fast. The sky was still half asleep, painted in soft gray, and the city buzzed with the sound of trains, footsteps, and hurried voices. Daniel held his son's hand tightly as they made their way through the crowded station. The little boy, Noah, swung his backpack back and forth, half skipping, half dragging his feet behind his father. Daniel was a single dad, and mornings like this always carried a mix of chaos and tenderness. He worked as a technician for a small company on the other side of town, and every day began with this same rush, making breakfast, checking homework, and catching the 7:30 train. Since his wife's passing 2 years ago, Daniel had been doing everything alone. Cooking, laundry, school runs, it all fell on him. But he didn't complain. He had promised himself that no matter how hard things got, Noah would never feel unloved or forgotten. That morning, Daniel was tired. He hadn't slept well. Work had been stressful and bills were piling up. But as he glanced down at his son's bright face, a small smile found its way to his lips. Noah had that innocent energy only kids carried, the kind that reminded Daniel what he was fighting for. "Dad, are we late again?" Noah asked between little gasps as they weaved through the crowd. "Not if we keep moving, champ," Daniel replied, gently squeezing his hand. The station was packed. People hurried past them. Men in suits, students with headphones, women with coffee cups. The air was filled with echoes of announcements and the metallic clatter of trains arriving and leaving. Daniel checked the clock hanging above the platform. They had just 5 minutes to catch their train. He guided Noah through the narrow space between commuters, trying not to bump into anyone. As they reached the edge of the platform, something caught Daniel's eye, a small figure sitting on the ground near one of the benches. At first, he didn't think much of it. People rested there all the time. But when he looked again, he noticed something that made him slow down. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was sitting very still, hugging a small teddy bear tightly against her chest. Her clothes were dusty and her hair looked messy, like she had been outside for a while. She wasn't crying, but her face looked pale, too pale. Daniel hesitated for a moment. He looked around, expecting to see a parent or someone watching her, but no one seemed to be paying attention. "People just walked by, lost in their own worlds. Dad, what's wrong?" Noah asked softly, tugging at his sleeve. Daniel nodded toward the girl. "Do you see that little one over there?" Noah followed his father's gaze and nodded. "Yeah, she looks sick." Daniel's first thought was that her parents were nearby, maybe buying tickets or distracted by luggage. But as he kept watching, something didn't feel right. The girl shifted slightly as if trying to stand, but her body swayed weakly. Then, without warning, she slumped forward and collapsed onto the cold floor. In that split second, the noise of the station seemed to fade. Daniel didn't think twice. He let go of Noah's hand and rushed toward her. "Hey, little one, can you hear me?" he said as he knelt beside her. The girl didn't respond. Her teddy bear had fallen to the ground beside her, and her small hands trembled. Daniel could see she was breathing, but barely. He gently touched her shoulder. "Noah, go call someone. Find help, anyone in a uniform, okay?" Noah nodded, wide-eyed, and ran toward a nearby security guard. Daniel stayed crouched beside the girl, trying to keep calm. He lifted her gently into a sitting position, supporting her back against his arm. Her skin was cold and her lips had lost their color. She opened her eyes for just a moment, her gaze unfocused. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," Daniel said softly. "Help is coming." She looked up at him weakly. Her lips parted and she whispered something, but he couldn't hear it. He leaned closer. "What was that?" "Mommy," she whispered, the word so faint it almost broke his heart. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He looked around again, scanning the crowd for anyone who might be looking for her, but no one seemed to notice what was happening. It was as if the world kept moving while time had stopped around the three of them. A few moments later, Noah came running back, followed by a security guard and a woman in a bright orange vest. The guard immediately spoke into his radio, calling for paramedics. The woman knelt beside Daniel, checking the girl's pulse and speaking calmly. "Good job staying with her," she said. "She's breathing, just very weak. The ambulance is on its way." Daniel nodded, still holding the girl steady. "I found her here alone. No one seemed to be with her." The woman frowned. "We'll figure out who she is. Just stay with her for now." Daniel glanced down again at the little girl. She was still clutching her teddy bear, her small fingers gripping it tightly as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. There was something about her that hit Daniel deep inside, a kind of quiet fear he recognized all too well. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, checking her vitals and lifting her onto a stretcher. As they worked, one of them asked Daniel what had happened. He explained everything he saw, how she'd been sitting there alone and then collapsed. "Do you know her name?" the paramedic asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, she only said one word, Mommy." The paramedic nodded with a grim expression. "We'll take her to St. Mary's. Thank you for helping." Daniel watched as they carried the girl away, disappearing into the crowd and out through the station doors. He stood there for a few seconds, feeling the strange emptiness that follows after a sudden rush of adrenaline. Noah came back to his side, slipping his small hand into his father's. "Is she going to be okay, Dad?" he asked quietly. Daniel took a deep breath. "I hope so, buddy. I really hope so." They stood there together in silence for a moment, the world around them moving again. Trains rumbling, people talking, footsteps echoing. But Daniel's mind stayed on that small, fragile face. Even after they boarded the train, he couldn't shake the image from his thoughts. The girl's pale skin, the way she whispered Mommy, the way no one had noticed her until she fell. He wondered how long she'd been there, waiting, scared and alone. Noah leaned his head against his father's arm, watching the scenery blur past the window. "Dad," he said softly, "she looked really lonely." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, she did." As the train rolled on, Daniel felt a strange ache in his chest. He thought of his wife, the way she used to hold Noah's hand in the same gentle way the little girl held her teddy bear. He thought of how quickly life could change, how fragile everything was. He told himself he'd done what he could. He'd helped her. That was enough. But something deep inside him whispered that this wasn't the end of it. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a pull, a quiet sense that his path and that little girl's had somehow crossed for a reason. By the time they reached Noah's school, Daniel was still lost in thought. He dropped his son off, forcing a smile and a reassuring pat on the shoulder before heading to work. But all through the day he couldn't focus. Every noise, every flash of memory brought him back to that station floor, the tiny figure lying there, the word Mommy echoing in his head. That evening, as he tucked Noah into bed, Daniel stood by the window and stared out at the quiet street. Life had a way of throwing unexpected moments at people, moments that changed everything without warning. He didn't know why that girl had appeared in his path, but deep down, he had a feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he could yet understand. And as he turned off the light, one thought stayed with him. Sometimes, even in the middle of an ordinary morning, fate has a way of reaching out, quietly, gently, and setting something in motion that can change a heart forever. The next morning started quietly. Daniel woke up early, though he hadn't slept much. The image of the little girl from the station kept replaying in his mind like an unfinished story. He could still see her pale face, her small hands gripping that worn teddy bear, and that one heartbreaking word she whispered, "Mommy." He tried to shake it off while making breakfast for Noah. Pancakes and scrambled eggs were their usual Saturday routine, but even the smell of butter sizzling in the pan didn't feel the same that morning. Noah sat at the table, swinging his legs, drawing something on a piece of paper. "Dad," he said without looking up, "do you think that girl is okay?" Daniel paused. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't expected Noah to still be thinking about her too. "I hope so, buddy," he said softly. "The doctors were taking care of her. She'll be fine." Noah nodded slowly. "She looked really scared." "Yeah," Daniel replied. She did. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the streets were coming to life. The sound of cars passing by, birds calling from the trees, neighbors heading out with grocery bags. It was just another ordinary morning, but Daniel's thoughts kept drifting back to that moment in the station. He couldn't explain why it affected him so deeply. Maybe it was because she reminded him of Noah when he was younger, small, fragile, needing protection. Or maybe it was something else, something harder to name. After breakfast, Daniel cleaned the dishes, still lost in thought. He kept wondering if anyone had come for her. Was she alone? Did she have family? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He couldn't just move on and pretend it hadn't happened. He looked at Noah, who was now sitting on the floor building something with his toy blocks. "Hey, champ," Daniel said gently. "How about we go for a little walk later?" "Where to?" "Just around town," Daniel said. "Maybe stop by the market." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "And maybe we'll stop by the hospital." Noah looked up, eyes wide. "To see the girl?" Daniel smiled faintly. "If they let us, yeah. I just want to make sure she's okay." A few hours later, they were standing outside St. Mary's Hospital. The building was big and gray, with glass doors that slid open as people came and went. Daniel felt nervous, unsure if they would even be allowed to see her. But something deep inside him told him he had to try. At the front desk, a nurse greeted them kindly. Daniel explained who he was and how he had found the girl at the station. The nurse nodded, checking her computer. "Oh yes," she said after a moment. "You must be the man who stayed with her. The staff mentioned you yesterday. That was very kind of you." Daniel shifted awkwardly. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone stops to help," the nurse said, giving him a gentle smile. "Her name's Sophie. She's stable now. Poor thing was dehydrated and exhausted. We're still trying to contact her family." "Sophie," Daniel repeated quietly. The name somehow made her seem even more real. Not just a memory from yesterday. "Can we see her?" Noah asked shyly. The nurse looked thoughtful. "Just for a few minutes, okay? She's resting, but I think she'd like some company." They followed the nurse down a long hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Daniel's heart thudded faster with each step. When they reached the room, the nurse gently pushed the door open. Inside, the little girl lay on a hospital bed wrapped in a soft blanket. The teddy bear was tucked under her arm just like before. She looked cleaner now. Her hair brushed neatly and a bit of color had returned to her cheeks. Daniel stepped closer, speaking softly so he wouldn't startle her. "Hey, sweetheart. Do you remember me? I found you at the station yesterday." Sophie blinked slowly and turned her head. Her eyes, a light hazel color, studied him for a moment. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she gave a faint nod. "You helped me," she said weakly. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, that's right. How are you feeling?" "Better," she whispered. "They gave me juice." Noah giggled a little. "I like juice too," he said, stepping closer to the bed. For the first time, Sophie smiled, a small, fragile smile that reached her tired eyes. Daniel felt something in his chest ease. That tiny smile made everything worth it. They sat with her for a few minutes, chatting softly. Sophie didn't talk much, but she listened carefully, nodding at Noah's little stories about school and his favorite cartoons. When the nurse returned to check on her, Sophie reached out and gently held Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You stayed." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Of course I did." When it was time to leave, Sophie waved weakly, clutching her teddy bear again. Noah waved back enthusiastically. As they stepped out of the room, Daniel felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. He was glad she was safe, but a part of him didn't want to walk away. At the hospital entrance, the nurse caught up with him. "We might need your contact information," she said kindly, "in case social services want to talk to you. You were the one who found her, after all." "Sure," Daniel said, writing down his phone number. "Did you say her family hasn't been found yet?" The nurse sighed softly. "Not yet. We're still trying. It's always hard when children come in without anyone to claim them." Daniel nodded. He thanked her and left with Noah, but his heart felt heavy. All through the afternoon, the image of Sophie's small hand gripping his stayed in his mind. He thought of how she had said, "You stayed," and it echoed over and over. He hadn't realized how much those words would mean to him until later that evening, when he was sitting on the couch after putting Noah to bed. He stared at the television, but he wasn't really watching. His mind wandered. What kind of life had Sophie come from? Where were her parents? Why was she alone at a train station? The questions wouldn't leave him. The next day, Daniel received a phone call from a woman who introduced herself as a social worker from the hospital. She thanked him again for what he had done and told him they were still trying to contact Sophie's family. "She's been asking about you," the woman added gently. "She says the man from the station made her feel safe." Daniel felt something twist in his chest. "Can I visit her again?" "Of course," she said. "She'd like that." Later that day, Daniel and Noah went back to the hospital. Sophie looked brighter this time, sitting up in bed, drawing on a piece of paper with crayons. When she saw them, her face lit up. "Hi," she said softly. "Hey there," Daniel replied. "What you drawing?" "A house," she said. "It's my house. It's got a garden and a swing." She paused for a moment and looked down. "But I can't go back yet." Daniel sat beside her bed. "Why not?" he asked gently. "They said they're looking for my mommy," she whispered. "She didn't come home after work." Daniel's heart sank. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to promise something he couldn't keep, so he just nodded slowly. "They'll find her, sweetheart. The people here are really good at that." Sophie looked up at him with hopeful eyes. "Do you think she's looking for me too?" Daniel managed a small smile. "I'm sure she is." He stayed with her for a while, helping her color and talk about things kids love: ice cream, pets, school. For a moment, it almost felt like they were just a little family spending an afternoon together. When he and Noah finally left, Daniel felt that same strange pull in his heart again. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something protective. He didn't know it yet. But that feeling was going to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's question. "Do you think she's looking for me too?" He wished he could say yes with certainty, but deep down he feared the truth might not be that simple. Still, he told himself that as long as she was safe, that was what mattered most. Before falling asleep, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself. He would keep checking on her no matter what. Something about that little girl felt like unfinished business, like fate had placed her in his path for a reason. And as the night grew darker and the world outside quieted, Daniel had no idea that the days ahead would test his heart in ways he never thought possible. Days passed, and Daniel found himself thinking about Sophie more than he expected. What started as concern had slowly turned into something deeper, a quiet worry that didn't leave him, even when he tried to focus on work or take care of things at home. He'd promised himself he'd keep checking on her, and he meant it. One afternoon, after finishing his shift early, he stopped by the hospital again. He'd told Noah he'd be home soon, but in truth, he just needed to see that Sophie was doing okay. When he reached her room, she was sitting up in bed, her teddy bear beside her, drawing with crayons. Her little legs swung back and forth as she hummed a quiet tune. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes brightened instantly. "You came back," she said with a small, excited smile. Daniel smiled and stepped closer. "Of course I did. I wanted to see how my favorite artist is doing." She giggled softly. "I'm better. The nurse says I can walk around a bit now." "That's great," he said, pulling up a chair. "What are you drawing today?" She turned the paper toward him. It was a picture of a park, green grass, a slide, and two stick figures holding hands. "This is me," she said, pointing at the smaller figure. "And this is Mommy." Daniel felt a tug in his chest. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said gently. "It looks like a happy place," Sophie nodded. "Mommy used to take me to the park. We'd feed the birds. She said birds always find their way home." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just smiled softly, keeping his voice steady. That's a lovely thing for her to say. A nurse entered the room to check Sophie's vitals and smiled when she saw Daniel. "Oh, you're back. She's been asking about you every day." Sophie giggled, hugging her teddy bear. "I told them you helped me at the station." Daniel chuckled lightly, though he felt his throat tighten. "Guess that means I'm your friend now, huh?" She nodded with a proud grin. "My best friend." The nurse finished her checkup and stepped out, leaving them alone again. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching Sophie color. He noticed how carefully she stayed inside the lines, how focused she looked. For someone so young, she seemed to carry a quiet sadness behind her eyes, the kind children shouldn't have to know. After a while, Sophie looked up. "Did you have a mommy too?" she asked suddenly. Daniel hesitated. "I did a long time ago. And I have a son. His name's Noah. You met him, remember?" "Yeah," she said with a small smile. "He's funny." "He likes to think so," Daniel said, chuckling. Then he grew quiet. "Noah's mommy isn't here anymore. She went to heaven when he was little." Sophie's eyes softened. "That's sad." "It was," Daniel admitted. "But we're okay now. We remember her every day and we talk about the good times." Sophie looked down at her teddy bear and hugged it close. "Maybe my mommy is in heaven too," she whispered. Daniel's heart ached at the sound of those words. He wanted to tell her no, that her mother was fine, that she'd walk into the room any minute now, but he couldn't lie. He didn't know the truth himself. All he could do was reach out and gently pat her hand. I think wherever she is, he said softly. She's thinking of you and hoping you're smiling. Sophie nodded slowly, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't cry loudly, just one quiet tear that said more than words could. Later that afternoon, a woman from social services arrived. She spoke with the nurses for a while, then came over to Daniel. She introduced herself and thanked him again for helping Sophie that day. We're still looking for any relatives, she explained. So far we haven't found much. It seems her mother's name was listed in a local registry, but we haven't been able to make contact. Daniel frowned. What about her father? The woman shook her head. We haven't located him either. We're working on it. Sophie was listening quietly, clutching her teddy bear. Did you find Mommy? She asked softly. The woman crouched beside her and smiled gently. Not yet, sweetheart. But we're trying very hard, okay? Sophie nodded but looked down again, her smile fading. When the woman left, Daniel stayed a little longer. He helped Sophie build a small puzzle, then read her a short story from a book the nurse had left behind. By the time he was getting ready to leave, Sophie's eyes were already drooping with sleep. Will you come again tomorrow? She murmured. Daniel hesitated but then smiled. Yes, I will, she smiled faintly, whispering. Good. I don't feel scared when you're here. Those words stayed with him long after he left the hospital. That evening, he sat in his car outside his apartment, staring at the steering wheel for a long time. He knew he was getting too attached. She wasn't his responsibility, and yet he couldn't ignore the feeling that fate had brought her into his life for a reason. At home, Noah was already in pajamas, sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. You saw her again, didn't you? He asked, grinning. Daniel nodded. Yeah, she's getting better, Noah smiled. Good, she's nice. I liked her, Daniel ruffled his son's hair. You've got a big heart, kid. They watched a movie together, but Daniel's mind wandered. He kept wondering what would happen if Sophie had no one to go home to. What if there really wasn't anyone looking for her? He knew the system. He'd seen stories on the news about kids being moved from one place to another, never really finding a stable home. He didn't want that for her. The next few days were busy, but Daniel still found time to visit the hospital after work. Each time he came, Sophie seemed a little stronger. She could walk around the room now, and the nurses said she'd soon be discharged into temporary care if no relatives were found. One evening, when Daniel arrived, he noticed Sophie sitting by the window watching the rain. Her teddy bear sat beside her and she looked deep in thought. Hey, Daniel said softly, sitting down. What are you thinking about? She turned to him and smiled faintly. The rain sounds nice. Mommy used to say it's like the sky washing away sad things. Daniel looked out the window too. That's a beautiful way to think about it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, The lady from before said I might have to go somewhere new soon. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. Just for a little while, until they find your family. Will I see you again if I go? She asked, her small voice trembling just a little. Daniel hesitated. Of course you will. I promise. Sophie's face softened. Okay, she whispered. When he left that night, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. He didn't know where she'd end up, and that thought made his stomach twist. A few days later, he got another call from the social worker. Her tone was calm but serious. Mr. Daniel, I wanted to let you know there's still no sign of any relatives. We've checked the records and tried every lead. It seems her mother... Well, there was an accident a few days before she was brought in. Daniel's heart sank. An accident? Yes, she said quietly. A car accident. Her mother didn't survive. For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. The world around him seemed to blur. The social worker's voice faded as he tried to process what she had said. When the call ended, he sat in silence, staring at nothing. The truth hit him like a wave. That little girl, so full of quiet hope, waiting for her mother, she didn't know yet. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop hearing Sophie's small voice asking, Do you think she's looking for me too? He wished more than anything that he could have said yes and meant it. The next day, he went to the hospital again, though part of him dreaded it. When he saw Sophie sitting in her bed smiling up at him, his chest ached. She didn't know the truth yet. The nurses were waiting for social services to decide how to tell her. Hey, he said softly, I brought you something. He handed her a small box of colored pencils. Now you can make your drawings even brighter." Her face lit up. "Thank you. You're the best," Daniel smiled weakly. "You deserve it, sweetheart." She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I'm glad I met you," she said softly. Daniel hugged her back, blinking away tears. "Me too," he whispered. As he left the hospital that day, rain began to fall again. Light, steady drops that hit the pavement softly. Daniel walked slowly to his car, the weight of everything pressing on his chest. He didn't know what the next steps would be or what the social workers would decide. But one thing was clear in his heart. He couldn't just walk away. Fate had crossed their paths for a reason. And deep down, Daniel knew. This was only the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The morning was calm, the sky clear and soft blue, the kind of day that made the world feel a little lighter. But inside Daniel's heart, things were far from light. The past few weeks had been filled with moments he couldn't forget. The hospital visits, Sophie's laughter, her small hand in his, and then the quiet heartbreak of learning the truth about her mother. It had been a few days since he last saw her. After the social workers told Sophie what had happened, Daniel gave her space, hoping she'd have people around her to comfort her. But the thought of her being alone in that hospital room still kept him awake at night. He kept wondering how she was coping, if she still smiled when she drew, or if she still asked about him. That morning, as he was packing Noah's lunch for school, his phone rang. The number on the screen was familiar. The social worker from the hospital. "Good morning, Mr. Daniel," she said warmly. "I wanted to let you know Sophie has been discharged today." Daniel's heart skipped. "Discharged? Where is she going?" "She's being placed in temporary foster care," the woman explained gently. "She'll be staying with a host family until we can make a longer-term plan." Daniel felt a mix of relief and sadness. "Is she okay?" "She's doing all right," the woman said. "She asked if she could say goodbye to you. If you're available, she'd love to see you one last time before she leaves." Without hesitation, Daniel said, "I'll be there." After dropping Noah at school, he drove straight to the hospital. The drive felt longer than usual, every traffic light making him impatient. When he finally arrived, Sophie was sitting by the window of her room, a small suitcase beside her and her teddy bear in her lap. She turned when she heard the door, and her face lit up with that familiar smile. "You came," she said, her voice bright but a little shaky. "Of course I did," Daniel said, kneeling beside her. "I wouldn't miss saying goodbye." She hugged him tightly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him with teary eyes. "They said I'm going to a new house," she said softly. "They said it's just for a little while." Daniel nodded, keeping his voice gentle. "That's right. Just for a little while. You'll have a nice place to stay and people to take care of you." Sophie looked down at her teddy bear. "Will you come visit me?" Daniel smiled sadly. "If they allow it, yes. And even if I can't right away, I'll always be thinking about you." She studied his face, her eyes wide and honest. "You're my friend," she whispered. "You helped me when nobody else did." Daniel swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "And you helped me too, sweetheart. You reminded me how much love this world still has." The nurse came in to let them know the car had arrived. Sophie stood up, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Daniel took a deep breath, then crouched down and said softly, "You be brave, okay? Just like you were that day at the station." Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay." He watched as she walked toward the door with the social worker. Just before stepping out, she turned back and waved. "Bye, Daniel." He smiled through the ache in his chest. "Goodbye, Sophie." When she was gone, the room felt emptier than ever. The following weeks were quiet but heavy. Daniel tried to focus on work and on Noah, but there was a space in his days now, a silence that reminded him of the little girl who used to wait for him by the hospital window. He wondered how she was settling into her new home, if she felt safe, if she still drew pictures. Then one afternoon, the phone rang again. It was the same social worker. "Mr. Daniel, I hope you don't mind me reaching out again," she said. "Sophie has been asking to see you and Noah. She's been adjusting well, but she talks about both of you often. Would you be open to visiting her?" Daniel didn't even hesitate. "Tell me when and where." A few days later, he and Noah arrived at a small house on the edge of town. The garden was filled with bright flowers and a swing hanging from an old oak tree. Sophie was outside, sitting on the swing, her teddy bear tucked beside her. When she saw them, she jumped up and ran toward them, laughing. "Noah, Daniel!" she shouted. Noah ran to her first, and they hugged like old friends. Daniel smiled as he walked up, watching them talk and laugh. Sophie looked healthier now, her face fuller, her eyes brighter. The foster mother, a kind woman named Mrs. Harlow, came to greet him. "She talks about you both all the time," she said kindly. "I think you made quite an impression on her." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling. "She's a special girl." Over the next hour, they sat in the garden watching Sophie and Noah play. They made up games, chased each other around the flowers, and giggled until they were out of breath. Daniel hadn't seen Noah that happy in months. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Sophie sat beside Daniel on the porch steps. She leaned her head against his arm. "It feels nice here," she said quietly. Daniel looked down at her. "It does," he agreed. "You've got a lovely home now." She looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think maybe I could see you and Noah again? Like, sometimes?" Daniel smiled gently. "If it's okay with everyone, of course. You're part of our lives now." Sophie smiled. And for the first time since he'd met her, Daniel saw a peace in her eyes, a calm that only came when someone finally felt safe again. After that day, Daniel and Noah visited her regularly. Sometimes they'd bring small gifts, coloring books, cookies, or toys, but most of the time they just spent time together, talking and laughing. Sophie loved hearing about Noah's school stories, and she often showed them her new drawings. One day she gave Daniel a picture she had made, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big, bright sun. "That's us," she said proudly. "You, me, and Noah." Daniel smiled, touched beyond words. He framed that drawing and kept it on his living room wall. Months went by and life started to feel balanced again. Sophie continued to thrive in her foster home, but as time passed, the social worker mentioned something that made Daniel's heart skip. "She's still not placed in a permanent family," she said. "We're considering options for adoption. Since you already have a bond with her, I thought it might be something you'd want to think about." That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after Noah had gone to bed. He looked at the drawing Sophie made, the 3 of them under that big sun, and he couldn't stop thinking about how natural it had felt to have her around. He didn't need to think for long. The next morning, he made the call. Weeks later, after several meetings, interviews, and paperwork, the day finally came. Sophie arrived at their home, not for a visit this time, but to stay. When she walked in, she looked around curiously, her teddy bear still in her arms. Noah grabbed her hand and said, "Come on, I'll show you your room." Daniel followed them down the hallway, his heart full. When he saw Sophie's smile, wide and bright, he knew this was exactly what was meant to happen. That night, after dinner, Sophie sat beside him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. Noah was already asleep. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. "Daniel," she said softly, "can I call this home now?" He looked down at her, his eyes warm. "Yes, sweetheart. This is your home now." She smiled, closing her eyes. "I like it here. It feels like family." Daniel brushed a tear from his cheek and whispered, "That's because it is." In that moment, he realized how much his life had changed, how one ordinary morning at a train station had brought them together. What started as a moment of compassion had turned into something beautiful, something lasting. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Daniel looked around the room. The framed picture she'd drawn hung on the wall, 3 figures holding hands under the sun. It felt like a quiet promise, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Outside, the night sky was full of stars. The world was calm again. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel's heart felt whole. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you for finding us, Sophie." And somewhere deep inside, he knew his wife would have smiled too, proud of the love that had grown from loss, proud of the family they had become.